So good morning, Your Holiness. Thank you for yesterday. I think many of us in this room, if not all of us, have in one way or another been touched by the experience of addiction, including addiction to lifestyle, apropos of your joking with Mathieu, but also addiction to the self, a compulsive relationship to the self. And we've been slowly in the meeting unpacking valences or issues, aspects related to desire, craving, and addiction. We've looked at the subjective experience of addiction through Mark. We've also explored basic neuroscience perspectives, not only from the view of the lab, the bench, but also from the view of life. And thanks to you, Jimpala, we had a kind of visit into ancient Indian psychological perspectives on the issues related to desire and craving. And I'm grateful for Vibeke opening up the relationship of social contacts and its influence on addiction, and how society actually views addiction might prime addiction itself. So today we have the opportunity to explore with Mathieu classical Indian psychological perspectives on craving and addiction and possible interventions. And looking at interventions from a contemplative perspective. So you and Mathieu are old friends. I don't think I need to introduce Mathieu to many of you in the room, but to some of you, just to say, Mathieu received his PhD degree in molecular genetics at the Pasteur Institute under French Nobel laureate François Jacob. After completing his doctoral thesis, Mathieu left his scientific career and concentrated on the practice of Tibetan Buddhism. He's an author, photographer, and collaborator with various neuroscientists in the study of meditation, particularly Richie and Tanya Singer. And Mathieu, you for many years have been involved in deep service to peoples of Tibet, for which I am so grateful, as all of us in this room are grateful. So we're looking forward to your presentation this morning. Thank you.
So, Your Holiness, if to Jimpala feel awkward to present, in my case it's about 100 times more, because I didn't do academic studies, as you know. I had the great fortune, of course, to live near great masters, including the Khyentse Rinpoche. And so, as a humble disciple, I'm so embarrassing when someone say like friend of His Holiness. So I'm going to share a few ideas from the practice and experience. That's what I received from my teachers. And so I wish to reassure you that this is not my hermitage. But this is what I see from my hermitage, which is only 2.5 meters by 3. And this is the place where it is said that in past lives, the Lord Buddha offered his body to a tigress and generated the bodhicitta. So this is called Tamolichin. So I have the great fortune also to spend some time there. So I thought it says that when the Buddha came to Nepal, there was
one of Buddha's previous
life, of course. There was a kind of place where there's a small mound of earth, and he did prostration to that, and his disciples were surprised because they didn't see the Buddha do prostration to anything much. And so they asked him why, and he said that because this is the place where in a past life he first conceived the thought of enlightenment for the sake of others. And the story was that he was a young prince with his brothers going in the forest, and he came upon a starving tigress with their little cubs, and she was about to die, and they were all going to die of starvation. So he let his brothers go and wanted to offer his body but the tigress was so weak that she could not eat, so he cut his veins with a bamboo shoot and gave the blood, and she became stronger, and the story is that she could eat the prince. And then, of course, so that was the first time that he completely made that wish. And of course, the tigress and the cubs were later reborn as the Buddha's disciple. He made also that wish. So in commemoration of that, there is kind of monument there. And it's one of the three main places of pilgrimage in the Kathmandu Valley in Nepal. So that's why also we have a retreat center there, which I'm happily spending as much time as I can. So I thought today to try to...
So later, one of important disciple of Nagarjuna, Ghosh.
Ashwagosha.
He at the end of his life, he want to carry on practice of Buddha's
previous lives.
Then he very much attracted about this story. So then somehow he also, come across one tigress.
Tigress. So the Ashwagosha too followed in the footsteps of the Buddha's previous life and gave his life to the tigress.
So right now there are leopards around my hermitage. Sometimes I see in the morning the poops of leopards.
Why not you practice
I'm
that?
not quite decided yet.
I think Mithu's life, I think living and work this, I think much more better than give.
But if it happens by accident, then at least I have a good story. So they said last year there was a real tiger came. So when I go at night for the bathroom, a little bit scared. Anyway, so to come back to how it began, probably it's not good English, sorry. How it began, or how it begins. So I wanted to take things from the very beginning, instead of jumping to craving, how that whole process from experiential Buddhist perspective, how is it described? So first of all, we begin perceiving outer reality, and we have perception of our own mind. So there is this thing that happens of notion of subject-object. In a way, we could say that's where all our troubles begin, because what follows then is a kind of chain reaction. So first we perceive outer objects. So if we were just perceiving reality as it is, and if we didn't build a gap between the way things appear and the way things are, then that's what is supposed to be an awakened person, someone without confusion, without the veil of ignorance. But that's not quite the case. So what do we call basic ignorance in Buddhism? It's not just not knowing the telephone directory by heart or lacking a certain number of plain information. It is a basic distortion of reality. And how does that distortion occurs? Well, when we perceive things, almost immediately we have a tendency to think that somehow they have attributes, qualities that we sort of project upon them or superimpose upon them. When we see something, I see this watch or something, I cannot but think that this is existing on its own. It has certain qualities. It is some kind of permanence. That's why I call my watch, although it cannot be really my watch. It's not part of myself. But somehow I think the same watch like yesterday. So already I've superimposed on this watch mine plus it's permanent, and so forth and so forth. And it's desirable if it's a nice watch, or if it's broken, sort of upset with the watch. So this qualification, somehow I assume it sort of belongs to the outer object. So then from my side, from the subject side, although my experience is a kind of continuous dynamic flow of experience from birth to death and seems to be much after that, but I somehow feel that deep within, the little boy, the student in Paris, now the aging monk, there's something there that is me that's always there. It's something constant, it's unitary, it's somehow autonomous, and it's kind of the core of my being, and without that, I'm nobody, and it's got a lot of loss. So I have to get this kind of feeling of security, I think security, of feeling that there is this kind of core, that's me. So then I start to reify self and phenomena. And this is, so the whole Buddhist investigation is to show that actually this is already a construction of the mind. That if you see, in the sutra we say, give it the example, that for instance the body of a beautiful woman is a temptation for a renunciant, is something that will give for a worldly person is an object of love and attraction, and for a tiger it's a good meal. So completely different perception, but yet we believe that despite that characteristic of pleasant, unpleasant, desirable, undesirable, friends, enemy, somehow do belong intrinsically, and we don't see that it is a mixture of our projections, the consciousness mingling with outer phenomena, something crystallized, this object seems to exist, it has such characteristics. And similarly, we reify the self as being autonomous existence. But if we look carefully, it's very hard to find it. I'm not going to go in detail, but you can find it in the body, you can find it outside, if you look in the mind, past thoughts are gone, future thoughts not yet there, present thought is ungraspable. It's very hard to find such a thing. So this is a kind of misconception, but we function like that. And especially regarding to the self, once we believe that this is the core of our being, then we need to protect it, we need to please it, so we become extremely vulnerable, of course, because the whole world is somehow going to be either something that after this superimposition, something that we need to attract because we feel it's going to be beneficial to the self, or something we need to push away because we feel somehow it's a threat to the self. So it does come with this reification of something is intrinsically harmful or threatening, and there's something there that is a target again that is somehow vulnerable. So that, of course, is that basic thing that gives rise to attraction, repulsion, which is the two first sort of movement once this subject-object, this dichotomy has been reified. So from then, that will unfold as more diverse, what we call deluded mental state, afflictive mental state. Our friend Bob Thurman just call it addiction, because somehow it's addiction to the cause of suffering. So classically, we distinguish 5 major of mental perturbations or afflictive or destructive mental state. The strongest and the most sort of destructive one being hatred, but also craving and lack of discernment. And in that case, it's not so much the basic ignorance, but it's lack of discernment about what needs to be achieved. Lack of discernment, what was to be accomplished was to be avoided in terms of law of cause and effect. So it is among the two kinds of ignorance, not about ultimate reality, like the first one, but about law of cause and effect. And then pride or arrogance, and jealousy or envy. And so those are 5 major. But then, of course, in the Buddhist scriptures, we speak of 84,000 of those. They are not exactly numbered one by one, but it is to remind us that there is almost infinite variety of the way that we could be deluded. There's no problem with that. And then, how does that going to end up? Because there's this distortion of reality, it is bound to be dysfunctional. If you assume things that are not, you superimpose, you fabricate, then of course, when you interact, the way you interact is also going to be biased, also going to be distorted, and that's end up in suffering. So then the whole Buddha's teaching was first to recognize that. So the truth of suffering is not simply, we didn't really need the Buddha to tell us that a massacre is a suffering or that a toothache is suffering, that we can know that. But deeper, to go at the deepest root of suffering that doesn't look like suffering. In fact, what my teacher was telling to some Western audience, what you call happiness, we usually call it suffering. So in that sense, it is not that obvious. So it's going to be a cause of torment. And then what the Buddha said, that we can find those causes. And the main thing is that there's a possibility of remedying to that. Otherwise, why bother? Because the antidote to ignorance, of course, is wisdom. And so therefore, there is a path. There is methods to that. The antidotes of various kinds, including for craving, addiction, and so forth, that is part of the path. So that's basically how it sort of happens. So from a very basic, starting from the beginning. So now let's go more specifically to desire, craving, and addiction. So first there's, as mentioned, aspiration. And aspiration, of course, so there's desire, which is almost like wanting, craving and grasping and addiction. So they're sort of increasingly sort of afflicted. So aspiration is something that can be very vast. It can be inspired by motivations, of course. So if your motivation is to free sentient beings from suffering, it's an attitude, the way you relate to the outer world and you relate to others. And it's a worldview. Do we see ourselves as a separate entity? And all I need to do in a little bubble of self-centeredness is to build my own happiness. And I'm not necessarily against others' happiness, but that's not my job. That's a worldview. Or do we feel that we all belong to same human family or even to the family of sentient beings, including all living sentient beings? So that's a worldview that will give rise to various aspirations in life. Whether I'm concerned about myself, of others, for a small number, large number, short term or long term. So that's a kind of motivation attitude. So of course, an aspiration depends entirely of the wholesomeness of your motivation and worldview. So that will make the difference. So likewise, desire and wanting in itself. It's often we hear that Buddhism aims at suppressing all desires. And as Isones said, we'll just sit on our chair and fall asleep very quickly. So if we don't want anything, then what a kind of life? We're like vegetable. So desire is all the driving forces. And if the desire is to free all sentient beings from suffering or to save the planet and take care of the future generations now, and of course, it is the wholesome driving force. So desire in itself is just like we could call energy, or just like we spoke about money, it's just a tool, can be used to build, can be used to destroy. So desire is the same. As long as there's no motivation, we can't say is desire is going to be afflictive or constructive. Now, craving becomes a little bit different. At least we need some words, as I was mentioning the other day, to identify something that has an element of affliction. So craving and grasping are mental state in the sense that there is now a kind of different mental events like thirst or grasping, clinging, self-centered considerations, and a lack of control. All these things will set in. And the reason we say it's afflictive is not a kind of moral judgment in itself, it's simply that it will lead to suffering. So it is a little bit that you can desire something like having a hot shower after going for a walk, but once you start grasping to something, then nature changes. It's a little bit like sometimes we give the example of a beautiful crystal glass. If you do, this is not the case, if you do like that, beautiful sound, that's just a desire or wanting, aspiration. Then when craving comes, putting your finger, the whole sound is gone, something has gone wrong, and it will end up in suffering. So triggers, it is triggered by what we all said the other day. It could be we call cue, or it could be a sight. You see something that you deem desirable or something that you hate. It could be a smell, it could be a situation, it could be a memory. Something comes. But that first thing is not yet the problem. It's like the spark. So if a small spark vanishes into space, it's okay. But the problem is when the small spark falls on a heap of dry grass, then it makes a fire. So it's the proliferation of thoughts. Why did that person say that to me? Well, if it's just gone the next moment, there's no problem. But if you say, oh, then you go on, 1 thought, 2 thoughts, 3 thoughts, it fills the mental space. And then you are completely taken by this object of attachment or whatever. Then you, not only you lose control, but you're also out of sync with reality. That means now, if it's an object of craving, if it's an object of craving, you see it as 100% desirable. As we say, there's a kind of, you can't perceive even the negative or what would be unpleasant characteristics. So we sometimes call it refractory. We are waterproof to anything that is not desirable. And of course, since this is not the case, at some point, we'll be deeply disappointed. Likewise, something we may feel 100% hateable, and then maybe the next day we'll reconcile and become friends again. So this is clearly superimposition. We are not seeing reality as it is. And His Holiness, remember discussing with Aaron Beck, telling him that when we are very angry, about 80% of our perception are fabrication and superimposed. So this is exactly what the Buddhist experience will say, that we distort reality a lot and therefore is dysfunctional. So addiction comes even further because now we are so engrossed in that sort of, that we lose our freedom, we lose our control, and so. And so then we are caught, where all the characteristics that we have heard is repetitive, and so many of those qualities. So therefore, we sort of powerlessly taken in and again and again and again, and of course suffering ensues, and it's very hard to break that cycle. So just as a kind of metaphor, we spoke about, could there be a positive addiction? So sometime in Buddhist scriptures, we try to use in a poetic way, like, will there be a positive hatred? So we say, yes, hatred of hatred, or things like that. So will there be a positive addiction? So addiction is a tireless action, right? We is no remission. I mean, we constantly, without any small instant, that our mind goes to something. So we could certainly speak of positive addiction if there's a right motivation, free from afflictive mental state, and endowed with wisdom. So in that case, that's what a bodhisattva does. Because a bodhisattva will never let go, even for a single instant, totally addicted to the determination to free all sentient beings. And it's exactly the vow of the bodhisattva that not for one thought should give up that extraordinary determination and pledge and aim. So in that case, we could metaphorically speak of positive addiction. And that is explained in that prayer, which is known as mentioned from Shantideva. As long as space endures, and as long as sentient beings exist, may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world. So that's wonderful, enlightened addiction. So now, so how can we deal with those strong sort of impulses and emotions, and say like craving, when we are drawn to something, seeing it as 100% desirable, and we hardly see anything else, and so there's this movement. So we could say, well, the easiest way is to indulge in it. So, and then that will be done, So then, we have a strong urge, we're satisfied, and that's it, no need to bother. The problem is, it's not what happens. By experiencing it, we do two things. We reinforce our tendencies to do so. We lower the threshold of the trigger that will make us want to indulge into that. So we become even more, we even reinforce that tendency. And we say it's like drinking salty water. The more you drink, the more you're thirsty. So that doesn't really work. So then people say, well, you have to repress it, suppress it. But then it also doesn't work, because it's like keeping a time bomb somewhere hidden under your chair. Now that thing's not going to be solved. It's still there, and it's ticking away, and it's going to blow at some point. So also doesn't work. So those two are usually not very successful. So now, how to manage with skillful means? So that's really what we have to do. We have to use our intelligence and our experience and methods and skillful means, that we don't let this flood of craving be just go on. We don't stop it, leaving it intact. So how do we do? So first of all, we must realize that the craving as an affliction is not going to do us any good. So we don't want to be complacent about it. And there's another phrase from the way of the Bodhisattva of Shantideva, who says, craving and the other passions are enemies without hands or feet. They are neither brave nor intelligent. How have I become their slave? Entrenched in my heart, they strike at me at will. Enough of such ridiculous patience. So we must do something. I have suffered long enough. I must find a way to get out of it. So then, when we are any kind of those overpowering emotions, why are they so powerful? In fact, it's not like a general of an army with 1,000 troops. It's not like a blazing fire that engulfs the room. It's not like boulder rolling down the hill. It's just a bunch of thoughts. And they may seem very impressive. Like you look at the monsoon clouds, you almost think you could sit on it. It's so bulky. But if you go with an airplane, everyone knows, it's shaking a little bit. Otherwise, there's nothing to grasp. When you are there, there's nothing to grasp. But yet, it's so powerful. So how come? So how can we deal with emotions in general and with craving in particular? So there's three possibilities. Before they arise, while they are there, invading our mind, and after. So in the beginning, we are not prepared. When they come, we are overpowered. At the end, we sit there, experience the full catastrophe of hatred, anger, and craving, and so forth. So we have to begin with after, in fact. After, first investigating the causes and consequences. How did I get into that mess? What are the causes? The situation, the context, the environment. Did I hang on with unvirtuous friends? Or did I just on my own got caught up in these things? And how do I feel now? Look at what my present condition is. Do I derive any fulfillment from that? So but just an honest sort of acknowledgement of that we are a mixture of light and shadows. That's where we are now. There's no point to be blind to that, but we cannot say it's an optimal condition. So after, we could have some kind of regret. We speak of different forces that will help us to deal with. Regret is not guilt. It's not like I'm useless, this is how I am, this is hopeless, and anyone is also the same thing, and the world is so bad anyway, so nothing is going to work. Regret is simply recognizing how did it happen, and this was not the right move. So therefore, why should I again repeat that and be addicted to the cause of suffering? So we may need to seek support. So in the case of sickness or addiction, it could be seeking for counsel, seeking for help, seeking for a friend. In the Buddhist context, we'll take support of a spiritual teacher. We may sit in front of the Buddha and take it as a support of our try to get out of that and our transformation. Then we need to apply some kind of antidote. So if the counseling person will give you some kind of advice, then you'll try your best to put it in practice. And if in the case of the Buddhist practice, there are a lot of practice to try to sort of get our mental stream free from those afflictions. And then after that, we need to make a kind of pledge and determination If I say, oh, it's okay, I can go to see a counselor and do some practice, or in the case of Buddhism, I can confess my problems, so I can do it again because there's a way to repair, then of course it's not the right way to do. So making a pledge that whatever it happens, at any cost, at least now I make that pledge. So that's really prepares you for then dealing a little bit better before the craving arises. So before the craving arises, as we mentioned yesterday or in the past days, we need some awareness. We need to be ready, as also Nora said. When we know that the plate is very hot, if we have to touch it, we know, and we're not going to jump. We'll do very fast. We pick up something, so we're sort of ready. So that awareness is about the spark, when that is going to arise, and then be mindful to identify it. So imagine that there is, we hear that there's a pickpocket here. I hope there's not, but it might be. So then if I don't know who is the pickpocket, then I know I'm very vulnerable. So if I don't know who is the person, so I may be a little bit, first if I don't know there's a pickpocket, I'll be mindless. And of course you'll get an easy way. If I know there's a pickpocket, I'll be a little bit more careful, but I don't know who. So still I'm in trouble. But if I know who is the pickpocket, then I will never lose sight of that nice person. So if I know that craving has put me in so much trouble, then when it starts showing its head, I'm not going to let it be. So it is really the time of the spark that needs mindfulness, that is awareness. Because when the forest fire is there, Arizona says, when the forest fire, what are you going to meditate upon, So that's too late. But the spark is much easier. So we need to ready ourselves and watch for the spark. Now the spark comes. Now it's dealing with emotion during. So the spark has arisen. The first craving has come in your mind, the cue. So of course, we should not underestimate the power of that, but let's say there's something arises, right? So now there is all the methods that can be used during. That means as the moment the spark has arrived. What do you do? So there are, at least in Buddhist practice, there's a host of methods, and I cannot review them because as there are 84,000 afflictions, there's also 84,000 entrance door to dealing with that. We say there are equal number, 21,000 to deal with hatred, 21,000 with desire, 21,000 with ignorance, and 21 extra thousand to deal with all the subtle aspects of those. So there's a lot of ideas, and it won't fit in this PowerPoint. But there are three sort of main ones. One is to apply a direct antidote, like heat and cold, fire and water. You just try to identify the mental state that is mutually incompatible with the one you are going to get rid of. So in case of hatred, it's very, very easy to see. It's like loving kindness, benevolence. You cannot give a blow and stretch a friendly hand in the same gesture towards the same person. Those are mutually incompatible. In the case of craving, it's less obvious. So traditionally, we do say that if the craving is clearly associated, which unfortunately is not always the case with addiction, with being completely engrossed in the desirable aspect of the object. This object I cannot live without that. It's 100% desirable. Then the antidote is to meditate on the undesirable aspects of it. And for instance, the classical example about being compulsively attracted to the beauty of another's human body will be to imagine what it will be if I take out the flesh, the bones, the organs, and heap it up in front of me. Not so appealing at all. So that's, or meditate myself as a skeleton, so all that compulsive attraction will be gone. But if it's no more pleasurable, like the problem sometimes with addiction, then we have a little more trouble. So then in that case, what the antidote will be is not as obvious, but if we think that what we lose here is our basic freedom, with loss of control, So the antidote will be somehow to find a place of inner freedom. So that's not as obvious, probably more difficult, it probably requires more experience, but you could see that the freedom and loss of control, those are two exact opposites. So as much as somehow, and we'll come back a little bit on that, you could find a place of inner freedom, that will be the antidote to lack of control. So now how to get that is a little bit more complicated, but there's such thing exists.
그리스도인데 세바디 유리 이동 왔던 돈에 세바 개변은 유리 이동 검제 대열에 미도보 검제 다이네 단다 쿠두시바나 지 가로진에 베세바 셔다 주제 제 간다 가이네 수수 냥배가리야 디기 용금에네 다돈 세배 왕게 디기 예 가비나 다콜라니 당전제 라완 라바인자 라완 주 제 답시 매트로스
So then there is a second kind of methods, which is to look at the nature of craving. And within that also there are, and the third one, which I'm going to see because is using as a catalyst. So the second one, looking as the nature of craving, there's also different aspect of it. One is to not associate mentally with the craving. Because, for instance, when the craving is there, it's same with hatred or anxiety or whatever, it just fills our mental landscape. It seems that we are one with that very powerful emotion. We are craving, basically. It's nothing else. But we always have the capacity, at least, to look at craving with the eye of awareness. Because the mind has this faculty, no matter what. Even you are caught in it, at least you can take it as an object of your awareness. Like if you look at the burning fire, you can look at the burning fire. And if you think about that, that in your mind that is aware of craving is not craving because it's awareness. And the experience shows that if you keep on doing that, in the beginning, that craving or anxiety may not go right away, but since there's now an element of something there that is aware but not craving, it has a tendency to grow, and the strength or the solidity of the craving or the anxiety has a tendency to melt. So of course that's easier to say than done, but at least experience shows that if it's done with enough experience or skill, we say, again with the poetic image, that slowly the craving will melt like the frost under the morning sun. And the sun, the warmth of the sun is like this awareness. So that's one method, and the interest of it is that there's element there of mindfulness, awareness. By nature, is not craving. So that's already something. And then the second point will be to recognize its lack of intrinsic existence. That seems to be more theoretical, but in fact, you see, I spoke of that impressive monsoon cloud, so impressive, you could think you could sit on it. And when you go, it's nothing to grasp. So similarly, if you look at this, again, don't look at the object of craving, but the feeling, the experience of craving itself, and look at it, and what it is. Again, it's not something solid, there's no color, there's no shape, maybe it's making a knot in my chest, but where? So the more you look, just looking at it, you can't find any kind of entity that is solid, that is like a rock or fire or whatever I mentioned. So that fact of looking, yes, it is strong, yes, it is manifest, but ultimately, it is a mental construct. It is devoid of intrinsic existence, at least on the experiential level. Of course, there's a physical component, but in the end, the physical component, it's translated to a mental experience, and that's what troubles you. Otherwise, there will be no trouble if you didn't have consciousness. So that we can do, and ultimately in Buddhist teaching, we say, yes, it appears, yet it is devoid of intrinsic existence. That's what we call emptiness of intrinsic existence. So then also so it's more of a way of looking at the nature of it. But then as a skillful means, there are methods which, you see, if a powerful thought comes and then it goes immediately, then there's no this kind of proliferation. So that's where I think the ultimate skill is. You cannot stop it from coming. Anyway, if it's there already, what can you do? You cannot stop it, it's already there. So there's nothing to do about that. But you can avoid that it proliferates. And that's really the key, at least in Buddhist meditation, not to let it multiply. So we give examples, like drawing at the surface of water. As you draw, the water is undone. Or like a bird passing through the sky, it passes through the sky, it leaves no trace. Even 1,000 birds passes, they don't leave trace. So if you don't lose sight of the sky, which is the basic nature, then you don't get caught. So those are the classical methods. And again, those are just very rough sort of pictures of that. But of course, there is a lot of teachings when we practice that comes with it, and mostly practice. And when we practice and then clarify hesitations and doubts and difficulties and progress with a qualified teacher, and then those things get refined. And of course, it's a very gross to just throw that on the table like that, but it gives you an hint of what is the method to be looking at it. And then the third one, which is, I think, just for it's like piloting a Formula One car, or and because this is really not what can be used, certainly not by beginners, and almost, in fact, by hardly anyone. So we don't speak of Formula One cars in the scriptures, but we say it's like trying to take a jewel from the snake's head or riding the tiger, all this very dangerous stuff. So in fact, it is based on the notion that by fundamentally those afflictions, if you look at it, their ultimate nature is emptiness. So how to use that in a practice? For instance, in the case of anger, you are sort of sleepy there, and someone shouts an insult, you wake up right away. How did he dare to say that to me? So if you look clearly, there is a moment of strong clarity at the very first outset of anger, before it becomes the real anger. So if you could just stay with that, the clarity, then your meditation could be enhanced. Likewise, in craving or desire, there's an element of bliss if it's not deluded. So if you could just stay with that, without going further in the deluded aspect or the compulsory aspect or the one that leads to torment, that also will be fine. And so, and likewise in ignorance, we say there's an element of freedom from concepts, but before it becomes stupidity. So those could be used by a very skillful practitioner. I just wanted to put it here to give a complete picture, but usually that's not what we begin with by no means. So, but those three techniques have one goal, and that single goal is to regain one's freedom, not to be the slave of our thoughts, and whatever method we might use, what we need is the method that works for us at the place where we are. It's like if you want to open a door, it doesn't matter if the key is made of iron, of silver, or gold. The key you need is the one that opened the door. So in likewise, whichever method is suited to the moment where you are, to the capacity that you have, and to the extent of your trouble, that's the one that will be necessary. So it's like a panoply of a skillful physician which has a lot of different medicine. If you just have a flu, you're not going to take a medicine for leprosy or TB. The one you need is for the flu. So, but addictions have a kind of a triple challenge, as we said yesterday. So for any change, so I know it's more like sort of scientific vocabulary, but for any change, you need to overcome tendencies. In the same way that how we build up tendencies, at least those we didn't acquire by some whatever influence of genetics or in Buddhist term from past lives or whatever. So we start with a certain traits and so forth. But we certainly force more traits, and we either reinforce or weaken some of those traits. So how that happen? It begins with thoughts after thoughts, emotion after emotion. So if you have a succession of anger emotions of few seconds each time, or of grasping and afflictive desire, that's going to build up a certain mental state. And you will be in certain mood. So if emotion lasts a few seconds, mood will last for more, for an hour or so. And if you repeat those moods again and again, then over time, obviously, it's going to change. And that's what neuroplasticity is about. That's what any kind of familiarization that could be with the thing that brings suffering is about. So then, now, you cannot just you could have an antidote for an emotion that is coming now, and that emotion is solved, but traits have been accumulated over a long time. So you can't expect you get rid of traits just like that. So if you give the example of a roll of paper that has been rolled tight for a very long time, it has taken some kind of bend. So if you put it flat on the table and you lift your hand, it will roll again because it has taken a kind of shape. So that's kind of trait. So now what we need is to either do it many times or put it under a heavy book until when you lift it, it stays flat. But that takes time. It won't be, again, you need to work in the same way, emotion after emotion, thought after thought, day after day, months after months. And from the scientific perspective, that sustained efforts are required to bring neuroplasticity. So that's what mental training is about. That's what we have been looking to our collaboration over the years, and that's fine. But from what I gathered the last few days, it seems that, so that's already a challenge, because it needs perseverance, it needs determination, you need to do the right method at the right time in the right way. But it seems that, as we have been discussing, there are two further challenges. It seems that in the case of addiction, neuroplasticity is somehow slowed down. What's I understood, that somehow the hippocampus, which integrates novelty and which is very important in training, seems to be less active, and that you are less sort of receptive to novelty because you do repetitive sort of behavior. So in that case, not only you have to go through a process of change, but that speed of that process is also impaired in a way or slowed down. So you have a second challenge. And then the motivation. So if you have a strong motivation to change, you go to a hermitage, you meditate for 6 months, you are carried by that enthusiasm. We speak of perseverance in Buddhist terms as the joy to go to practice virtuous deeds, or the joy in form of effort. So, but here, the motivation is weakened as well. I mean, you sort of don't feel to do so. Maybe it goes with depression, with stress, and I think the motivation system. So you have got facing 3 challenges, which is of course daunting in a way. So you need to address all of those, isn't it? So I don't know what to say, but instead of boosting neuroplasticity, I mean, from what I heard, you could do physical exercise and be less stressed, go to a place where so all the things which are known to facilitate neuroplasticity, training, of course, but combined with any possible thing that will re-kick the neuroplasticity. And again, motivation from virtuous friends, from a spiritual teacher, from a good person, from someone who inspires you, who could re-kick your motivation, take you out of this sort of messy environment, put you in a different environment where or maybe makes you helps other people to grow more interest in others or compassion, so that your motivation system is activated so that you think, yes, I do have a potential for change, no matter the mess in which I am. So that would be the way. And then you could go back to the first one, which is simply to do the training so that the change occurs. So we should find ways to re-facilitate neuroplasticity and to rekindle the motivation. And there are certainly skillful ways to do so, whether it's an environment, whether it's personal, whether it's to counseling, whether it's to completely changing your life situation as much as it's possible. Of course, that's all something theoretical. If people are in very deprived condition and very poor environment, they don't have necessarily that choice. But specifically with addiction, what could we say about the Buddhist method? So dealing with cues. So we have heard how powerful cues are. The triggers. So, but the cues again, even is very, very, as Kent was telling me, is very sort of basic and instinctive and so forth, that's hardly come at the level of concept, but still there's a mental image. Otherwise, if you are not aware of that cue, I mean, there's no cue, or there's no trigger. So a mental image is still a mental image, and you can think of a number of things to do with mental image. Because once it's there, sort of, again, the whole thing sort of blows. But if somehow you could switch quickly to another mental image, it's not that you are trying to fight that powerful cue, but the mind is actually filled with what it perceives. So if I suddenly look at the Buddha, of course that will still somehow be there, but I cannot but have some of what that image brings in the mind. So it brings the idea of serenity, of perfect control, of compassion. So at least there are some other thoughts will start flourishing in the mental landscape. And the amount of space they will take, that much less will be taken by the trigger, what is the trigger. So if you could favor, I heard, for instance, that when you have strong migraine pain, many methods have been tried, like trying to simply distract yourself, doesn't work so well. Concentrate on the pain, where that was not with meditation, but just focus on the pain, that doesn't work. Counting from 100 to 1, 3 by 3, 97, 94, also doesn't work well. What was found to work best is visualization. Imagining yourself, in a beautiful island or at a beautiful concert or maybe there in my hermitage, that seems to be found to be the most powerful to deal with this chronic pain. So likewise, you could imagine, imagining sitting on the balcony of my hermitage in front of the Himalayas or thinking of His Holiness or thinking of the Buddha, means bound to do something. Even, you have to, so it's not directly try to stop that craving, but fill your mental landscape with something else. Or you could have, Buddhist techniques have plenty of other images. Sometimes if you see an object of craving, you might imagine it bursts into flame and it disappears. So you could try that after all. So there's plenty of those tricks and methods. So that could be possibly do. Then, we need to deal with the spark. Then we said about repetitive behavior. You cannot disengage. Normally, we gave the example of the rat. Even the orange juice is not there. Still, it cannot help but pressing the button. So then again, repetitive behavior, you still have, it's a multiplication of sparks. So somehow the same method of mindfulness, of awareness, of bringing different images, somehow, there could be ways with awareness, mindfulness, with setting your mind in a more, because after all, no matter what kind of thoughts there are, beneath the screen of thoughts, there's always this awareness. Whether you are aware of hatred, you are aware of craving, you are aware of inner peace, you are aware of something. So if you could relate more to that basic awareness, that's a place that is free from those, because that's the necessary component in the consciousness to get rise to that. Everything has a component of awareness. So if you just try to focus on awareness, that may help to sort of slow down that repetitive, I don't know, but this is just a weird idea. And visualization could be helpful. And there's plenty of visualization proposed in Buddhist practice. And then dealing with entrenched tendency, that's practice, practice, and practice. And there's nothing else we can do. Because as His Holiness said once in France, one of the problems sometimes is that we think that enlightenment, or in that case, freedom, should be easy, quick, and if possible, cheap. So that will not work. So I must end with a depth of gratitude, and to those to whom I owe everything, and I hope I didn't too much betray their kindness and their wisdom. So to my first teacher, Kangyo Rinpoche, and to Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who His Holiness knows very well, Trisha Rinpoche, and of course His Holiness. Thank you so much.
So, Mathieu, before we take our tea break, I wonder if there's a question you want to pose to His Holiness.
Well, one of the things that Nora said, Your Highness, about the fact that these repetitive things, even she said yesterday, even we remove the orange juice, the rat keeps on trying to get it, and he doesn't move to, okay, there's no orange juice, I should do something else. So in Buddhist practice, that repetitive sort of tendency to still go to the object of craving, that seems to be one of the main problems with addiction. How would we deal with that? Yes. What will be about the many methods? What thing will be helpful?
I think you already mentioned. The Jikshana, I think I may add, many of these destructive emotions, one cause is that 300
So sort of endowing some kind of intrinsic attributes to the object.
That you already mentioned. Now, another factor is extreme self-centered attitude.
So on the part of the subject, there is not only a belief in some kind of intrinsically real me, which is the core of my being, but there is also a kind of effective relation to this, where you take this to be so important and such a source of cherishment. So there is not only a self-grasping, but there is also a selfish kind of self-centered tendency that goes with it.
제가 랑진진 로디 도스 바직 가서 냐로 짜투나 현지 다디냐 짜야 답시디 현지로 놓고 해야 되거든. 그래서 현지로야 또 공부해 있나? 그 타치도 랑집은 준비 로이 왕기 다치기 시작은 내가도 시작을 직접 해야 되고 정수가 도와야 지기. 다 안들지 지금 안 차별이 좀 뭐지? 나르고 사실 이거. 네. 뒤져봐 요소리.
So if we somehow find a way of kind of releasing the strong grip of this excessive self-focus, where we take ourselves to be so important to the point where we are oblivious, we don't see the well-being of others and their interest. So if we are able to dampen that down, to release the strong grip, then the only way to do that is to shift the focus more from self to others, to include others. And that automatically will have some kind of effect on lessening that intensity. And that will also have an impact upon other emotional reactivity as well. Because if you look at many of the afflictions, particularly like attachment and craving, they're all self-referential. I want this, I need this, I want this. There's always this predication of an I. So if you have less of that self-focus, that it's going to have an impact.
제가 당신 로디디 되셔도 돼도 되셔도 그 자체거든. 지금 그게 현실 참고 주나 대개적으로 전부 실내인도 남사 당하들 내고. 저장 갖고 당원 거야 당원디 타지도 시에별로디. 봐. 자, 다디 라진진디 땡땡땡 저치기로 소리도.
So we can also see this kind of kind of mechanism or process taking place in even hatred as well. So underlying hatred is a kind of a self-attachment, excessive self-attachment. And because when you see someone doing something to you that is unjust, and you take that so seriously, your reaction to the other is that of anger and hatred. So even not just attachment and craving, but also in relation to anger and hatred, lessening this excessive self-focus will have an impact as well.
So therefore, I consider our work, our effort, or at least our thinking, is to educate secular ethics. Ethics means sense of concern of others' well-being. You see, once you see that through education, you see that way of thinking become part of one's own life. Or then I think many of these sort of the mental crises
problems
are due to self-centered attitude certainly will reduce. Not talking about say next life or God or these things. Simply, you see, they work the system of our emotion. If we, because of the, if you analyze this system, then I think that's the way. So antidote, the awareness, the pros and cons are very important. One factor, because of the one hand.
aspect.
Another hand, try to reduce extreme self-centered. So there's the way again is it reduce self-centered attitude. Again, awareness. So key element is awareness, long-term interest, short-term interest. So that's why I mentioned yesterday that sometimes we only talk about the little thing. Then I think our human brain may complain us that because of 지금 남주 누구를 스타일 때 디마셔 제지 지지다 북춘주 레벨까지 해야 돼.
So Samus was saying that earlier yesterday or the day before, he mentioned the fact that if the scientific research is too focused excessively sometimes with the animal brain, the human brain might complain, saying that actually I have a lot more capacity. So why aren't you taking me more seriously?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a practitioner, wonderful. Thank you.
So we're going to take a short tea break, and I'm going to also ask the presenters to be conjuring questions. We should have a very active discussion in the final hour of this morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, particularly for your remarks on awareness and self-centeredness. And I think that there was a conversation last night among some presenters and your staff about addiction to the self. So I think it's a really important perspective for us to consider. I think also right now, those of you who work in the field of addiction realize that the reality of cultivating awareness to prevent the spark might be a little bit challenging. And also, neuroscientists who understand how the brain operates might have the perspective that hijacking the prefrontal cortex is something that happens in the experience of addiction, and so it might not be so easy to prime awareness in these conditions in order to prevent the cascade of destructive conditions. So what I would love to see us do in this hour is to really begin to unpack these issues, both the issue of context that you are dealing with in your work of how social conditions affect the experience of a person who's addicted, and also how the brain operates in these conditions. And what is your vision of how we can actually prime awareness at the level of prevention, and how we can also produce a view of the self that is liberated, not confining, and conducive to suffering. So I hate to put you on the spot, Richie, but could I ask you to begin the discussion, please?
Sure. Well, Metula, your discussion, I think, was extremely helpful, and Your Holiness, in your comments afterward, focused on this issue of awareness as one component and reducing extreme self-centeredness as another. In our discussions yesterday, one of the things that you said, Your Holiness, is after hearing about how the brain is affected by addiction, you, I think, very naturally came to the conclusion that someone who is extremely affected, it may be very, very difficult, and maybe more of our effort should be focused on prevention. And this also is where the bridge, I think, can be so effectively made between this topic on craving, desire, and addiction and our initiative together in secular ethics. And so, particularly with children, I wonder if there are reflections or advice that you have on the issue of reducing extreme self-centeredness in children as they develop. This is something particularly when children reach adolescent years becomes very, very important, and nothing is more important than me, mine, and if there is a way that we can help them to navigate this particular transition in life, maybe we can build healthier habits of mind that would be effective in preventing the cascade of later problems.
I think in Emory University, so your presentation, when book and the university, yeah, the Kenyan to or come on, go in, they magazine, quite a judge,
So, Richie, in your presentation at the conference in Emory, you showed a video of how children kind of instinctively prefer a helping behavior rather than a hindering behavior, based on that, image of a block being pushed up or pulled, pushed down. So this shows that these are natural tendencies that the children have.
And certainly, I think everyone, you see, I think much appreciate a smile or friendship, isn't it? So the children, I think as a social animal, I think at a young age, I think the basic nature of human being is some kind of sense of community. So play together. They don't care what their family background, what they are sort of, because of the religious, because of the background. And also racial background. Don't care. So long, they play together, smile, and occasionally a little fighting. But within a few minutes, forget. So that's the basis of our hope. If right from the beginning, we are negative, then cannot do much.
No, there's not much we can do.
So now problem, basic the human sort of nature, good things as a social animal, and come from mother, and the mother's milk, you see our survival with mother's milk. So we everyone, you see, come that way. So then gradually, you see, these basic sort of human good things are dormant way.
They become more and more dormant and less obvious.
Then the environment, as we already sort of discussed, you see, the materialistic sort of culture. And I think the society, the materialistic culture, and too much competition, then you see the self-centered is somewhere important in order to survive yourself. If you remain humble, then I think people look down, this is weak, like that. Or say, I, the best human being. Particularly during election. So like that. So that is the sort of kasota. So you see the basic sort of good value eventually due to lack of kasota.
It's a lack of kind of thinking about it and taking interest in it. Negligence, yeah.
Negligence. Then the other sort of
forces, other factors.
Due to culture, materialistic culture, environment. And then the worst thing is education itself. Unless you take some faith, nobody talks about the value of compassion, these things. An existing education system is, as I mentioned earlier, materialistic sort of oriented. So then the children's mind growing, the only that way. The basic human value at the very, very early age, very much alive. Now that, and it become kasota, dormant, like that. So that basic sort of value there, then educate. This is a very important sort of value. Till your death, this is something really worthwhile to be alive in our
keep
mind.
it alive. No?
So that's my view.
Can I say something?
Mathieu.
I think also
If unless you see, we work the fundamental level and the wider
From a wider approach.
wider approach. Just you see few people, you see talk, not much effect.
I mean, it's change of
The
values, but also change of worldview.
Majority of the younger generation, you see, if come this existing sort of way, not much hope.
Yeah.
Then I think really better to think oneself or try to peace of mind in a hermit life, then okay. Don't care what the rest of the human being. That is immoral. And reality also, you see, if world really becomes something, I think very existing problems which we are facing, including corruption, war, violence, or corruption, cheating, bully, exploitation, even religion, wonderful thing used for exploitation. We are lacking because of lacking these moral principles. So therefore, the world remain like that. How can one individual remain happy person? No, difficult. I think best thing is some surgery. Some require maybe surgery.
So you do a surgery so that you don't care that much. No.
Oh, through surgery, your mind become dull. And does eat, sleep, okay. Not much thinking about others. Then be a happy person. Like animal. Unless you see immediate threat there, right? Peaceful, quite peaceful. Look, those are the pigs. Although you see, sooner or later you see kill. But so long, you see, because of the feeding well, no immediate threat, then very peacefully remain like that.
So also I wanted to say that, like if you look at those places, like you can see, where there's a very strong sense of community, and especially for the children, because there are many nomad tents and all the community mix. So a 7-year-old will always carry a 2-year-old, and they will until adolescence they will always be involved naturally. Nobody has to force them. Naturally they come to help and help milking the animals and so forth. So there's hardly any place for this very terribly individualistic society. So I think when we frantically we need self-confidence, of course. We have the inner resources to deal with the ups and downs of life. But when we try frantically to boost self-esteem, we know what it has given is a bunch of narcissistic people. We talk of the narcissistic epidemic. And this is...
self-esteem So generally speaking, I mean, in actual reality, in actual reality, the more someone's tendency is to think about others' welfare, it's more other regarding in their kind of attitude, the greater the sense of courage this person will have.
And more self-confidence. As I mentioned the other day, the think oneself more selfish than deep inside fear, the distrust. As I mentioned yesterday or something like that.
Mathieu, in relation to addiction, I was thinking about the antidote to addiction from one perspective could easily be generosity. How do you create the conditions where generosity is profoundly valued in human relations, particularly, at the beginning of the educational experience, which could be restructured in a way that it was non-competitive, for example.
As you mentioned, you see the nomads,
Yes.
the children. Similarly, I think many years ago, in Switzerland, Pestalozzi,
village.
there are some Palestinian children and Jewish children live together, play together. So no sign of, you and me. No. We and they.
We and you, we and they.
Then atmosphere, or sometimes education also, you see too much stress. We are Jewish, they are Palestinian. That creates this, since 48, now still problems, still killing. If right from the beginning, this is stress. Well, Jewish people, same human being, and particularly have to live together, one place. I think educate or stress on that, I think today's problem, I think maybe much less. Our case also, you see, some Tibetan, is it too much sort of thinking, we Tibetan, and don't care, and want to create enemy, Chinese. That kind of attitude will not solve the problem. Only, you see, bring Chinese people as human brothers, sisters, together. We are willing, remain side by side as human brothers, sisters. Then we can solve this problem, isn't it? So the practical level also, you see, I think too much is sort of stress, you see, we and they. That's the, maybe temporarily, I think Chinese sometimes you see now, they too much sort of emphasis about nationalism. For temporary, good, but too much, long run, difficult. So we must sort of stress we are as a sameness of humanity. Now environment now telling us, isn't it? So
it's actually the problem of environment and ecology is reminding us that there's, we don't have the time to be obsessed with this, dichotomies of east versus west and north versus south.
Sorry, because of
Interference.
Now, I mean, I think also in terms of education, I think if we think of cooperative learning, it's so much more better than competitive learning. I mean, there have been hundreds of schools that have been practicing that, bringing 5 or 6 children to get by groups of 5 or 6, and then someone who is a little bit better with someone less good, and then they learn together. So it brings a much better atmosphere. The academic results are much better. The relation with the teacher is much better. I mean, everybody wins. And so it's humanly, emotionally. So this kind of thing is just a matter of seeing more that cooperation is more the way to go. And I think considering all the challenges that we are facing in our modern time, the only thing that will work is have more consideration for others. For the short term of the economy, for the mid-term of quality of life, and the long term of the environment, it's all a matter of selfishness versus consideration for others. Look at future environment, it says it's a big problem, but it is a matter of selfishness versus altruism. So there's no question. So I think
obviously the summit, because Copenhagen
Summit.
Because the Dutch, Copenhagen sort of summit about environment. I think finally it's failed to produce concrete, effective sort of guidance because the importance of people they too much emphasis about their national interest rather than because of the global interest.
So to come back to craving, it does start with this excessive self-centered. If you think me all day long, of course you are going to look for what is going to please that me and get away. So, but if you somehow have this inner confidence that you can deal with it, whatever happens, they are less vulnerable. You don't need to satisfy them by getting this and getting that. So naturally, what you look for is to others. So again, it may seem paradoxical, but one core antidote to craving would be, to care for others, because then you forget a little bit about things. I mean, about your own sort of hopes and expectations and fears and something like that.
So, Sarah, I'd love to.
According to my secular sort of ethics sort of view, I think sometimes I feel, you see, the way the presentation, you see, you are Buddhist. So from your teacher, and then you see the monastery, some people may say, oh, he really wonderful as a Buddhist. You see, he developed these things, Buddhist practice. We are not Buddhist, no interest. So that's why, you see, my book, Beyond Religion, means any religion, there's boundary. Beyond that, you can't go. Even though someone intellectually sees some value, but emotionally, I'm not Buddhist. So I think maybe may use some Buddhist concept, or so Buddhism is nihilism. So not good.
No, and it's not practical, for the kinds of populations, for example.
So we are
that you
thinking
work
about
with.
humanity,
Yeah.
not thinking the Buddhist or Christian or believer. We are talking about humanity. So we should not create religious boundary. Right?
Sorry,
No.
this is my job. So.
But you see, I'm Buddhist. So you see, you create sort of good impression about Buddhism. I appreciate. But on the level of 7 billion human beings, then I feel a little bit of reservation.
So, Sarah, you're in the trenches. You're doing the work directly with people who suffer from addiction. I'm wondering what your perspective is, and particularly in relation to, transforming how people view reality and self and other, and these kind of fundamental changes which will have cognitive and brain reactions, brain effects.
That's quite a question. One thing I'm really struck by and curious about is this notion of addiction coming from this self-centeredness, and reflecting on many of the people that I've been working with, specifically many of the women are coming to mind who have spent much of their lives sacrificing their own needs, and are coming more from a place of depletion and deprivation, and perhaps going to substances, whether it's food or alcohol or drugs, for nourishment. And curious in terms of that, how these antidotes, I hear the generosity being one of the antidotes, and just curious how that sort of fits with someone who might be moving through the world in a very different way.
In a quote, self-sacrificing way.
Yes. Which.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We know Isonnes mentioned, I think the other day, that when he was first told about the concept of self-hate, he just could not relate to that, and then it needed to be explained. So I think in those cases, there's certainly, I think someone has been under heavy burden of precisely having to become almost an instrument for others, or are being denied happiness by being abused or being neglected or completely put down. So in that case, so then the concept of self-compassion, which in the beginning we were a little bit, personally I was surprised, because in Buddhist classical we don't use that so much. But if we think about it, what it means is somehow to decide that we really want to do something good for oneself. And what does that mean? Is to recognize that even I've been denied happiness for so long, even I've been abused, even the mere name of happiness is painful because I could not access to it, yet somehow, somewhere deep within, if I was able not to suffer, it would be better. So self-compassion is to acknowledge that with warmth and with seeing that it's possibly a potential. So when you sort of seek some way, and of course you are in disarray about where to find that. So it could be that something that provides some kind of relief in a kind of, we could say, fast and easy way is of course welcome in the midst of all this denial of our well-being, of happiness and so forth. But then I think the next step, once you gain some understanding of that and you could build up a little bit of that, whether it helps for craving or not, but then you can also start to understand that even people are confused, even they look for happiness in the wrong place, somehow, like you, they would prefer not to suffer. And then from that basis, then you can also expand to others, and that can work. The two together, somehow. Whether it helps for craving, I don't know, but...
self-compassion
디안 코아디 다 가소리다 소소베 자원에 가게 말씀했었지 디 코아디면 놓지다 아는 안저던 슝자 나로래 내가 당고 코라 꾸니 신을려고 랑드 추구 현주 수수도 랑드 세디도 같아 산지 고마 두야 돼 랑드 미유지간 순고로데 애니 심지 샤비네 쳐도 저와 현준도 랑그 정주 탐됐잖아요. 네가 랑든 되니 걸로 리크도 같아. 이내다고디 자고 끊어놓고 샹라 팬도 줘야 된다라. 랑이 네버데 맞춰야 된다리야. 성스던 거 요리 이내 대도 쳐지 랑도 되니 걸로 리겨 같아. 게임도 같아.
So with respect to this whole discussion on excessive self-focus versus
샹라 팬도 소소이네 죽어야지. 소디 샹든도 다 죽어야 쓰거든. 이는데 가서래 우대be 소리지 샹든도 저는 아주 좀 있어야 되는 소리지
야와 그 삼바 닌제 트윈을라 랑라 닌제 셴라 닌제 니까 용도
랑라 세요로 용도 되네.
So it's only saying that in this whole discussion about compassion versus altruism and compassion on the one hand versus excessive self-focus and self-centeredness, sometimes when people misunderstand listening to Buddhism or reading Buddhism, they seem to have this misunderstanding that somehow what is being suggested is a kind of a diametrically opposed understanding of self-interest versus others' interest. And then altruism and compassion and the ideal of those that is demanding that we totally forget ourselves. We don't think about our own needs and interest. And this is not the case. And if you look at the classical Buddhist formulation or envisioning of what enlightenment is, even there, that there is an acknowledgement that there needs to be a fulfillment of one's self-interest as well. In fact, the conception of Buddhahood as a union of the truth body and the form body is an understanding of the... So the Buddhahood is actually characterized as the fulfillment of two interests, self-interest and others' interest. And also when you generate the altruistic awakening in mind, seeking enlightenment, you're seeking enlightenment for yourself, but for the purpose of bringing about others' welfare. So what is pointed out is not that you forget yourself or your needs, but the ultimate goal of your spiritual pursuit has to be of bringing about others' welfare. So it's not a question of dichotomy of self-interest versus others' interest.
I'm just reminded of Michael McGrath's work in pathological altruism, and I feel like self-sacrificing behavior is also addictive in its character. So, I don't want us to separate, if you're behaving in a way that's altruistic, where you're harming yourself mentally or physically, that's pathological altruism. But it's basically a self-based condition. Yeah,
Yes,
so.
I would like very much to know if Nora and Kent, from those few hints presented there from the normal Buddhist experience, whether you could see something that would resonate with the way you seems to approach, and if anything that could be used or not.
At first, I'm resonating totally as a clinician because the way that you intervene in the treatment of drug addiction, one of the most widely applied evidence-based methods is the group therapy. And the group therapy, like Alcoholic Anonymous, Heroin Anonymous, one of the most important active ingredients that predicts outcomes is the ability of you as an individual to help the others in the same situation go through the transition of the process of drug addiction. That's a crucial step. So you become a mentor for someone, and you are there and guide them. And that is probably the most active component of it in terms of why it helps individuals. So I completely resonate with the notion of turning that focus on yourself and that need into trying to help others. From the neuroscience perspective, there, at least from what brain imaging is showing, is the act of giving to others is highly rewarding. There is, and we all feel that. I mean, there's as much pleasure. I mean, many times there's more pleasure on giving something to someone than on receiving it. So our brain is wired. We're social creatures. It is crucial for the survival that we respond that way. And I think that's so. But I was thinking as you were bringing it forward, because on treatment is something that we have looked at all along. But I wanted what my brain was questioning it. I always look at things where they don't completely match. I was thinking of the experience of the Native Americans who are actually have very, very high rates of alcoholism, and who are brought up in a society of high level of awareness and community. And yet the risks for addiction are extraordinarily high. So I was trying to figure in my brain to what extent there are other roads where if you're going to do a prevention, how would one do it? And it may have to do with the inequalities of a system. So why that, in that case, is not preventing them from going into addiction, because they are in a system that is very unequal with the rest. But what are your thoughts?
Well, if you have a community and you lose the kind of world vision that inspires you, somehow because you have been denied your rights, or you have been put in a situation that is not you cannot function as you used to do in relation to nature. So then it will be more like contagious than anything else. If the core values of what makes a community sort of common goal or vision or something like that is lost, then in fact the community might accelerate, because you all sort of fall together into a state of despair or boredom and so in that case it goes even faster, because precisely you get together a lot. So I don't know,
literally demoralized,
and then you resort to whatever may easily come your way. So maybe there's one possibility.
I mean, historically, did indigenous communities in the Americas engage in intoxicants at the level that we see today?
Native Americans now the Toteka Nansing rural Kitodanki. So you get your day in the Changlia, Ninkomshoni Shukshimushu to us. The Consulia and the Kuchizo Nanguki community and to share the your day in a depend on Marvas. The testicle lamb.
So So when did the use of intoxicants of this nature commence?
Well, I don't know exactly when it commenced, and what I do know, we know that the problem of alcoholism has been recognized as being very severe for the past 34 years. Does that mean that it was not there before? I do not know. But it was not there before the Spaniards came. So it's a process that has reached pretty epidemic proportions.
In relation to culture
existence.
change.
Yes.
Success.
Yes.
the 吃住戏剧之类，
Yes.
本老民的天津着，不是民族杀心蛋，恰上写住军民写不的，这是我是记住其他个这个的，我也这个推荐名做的，基本上要的强度要做的，这个可别强度要的，我们到时候那但这强度东西，但另一个的强度还是玩不拍些，忙些对吧？这是这里印度拍些的么子生活，但记住了，我是啥个？ 但我可是给要嘛，但就当然强度的嘛都没有嘛，哎，那个公民之间，但一直下的。
He's also saying that listening to you and telling the story about the experience of Native Americans and their problematic relation to alcohol reminded him of a line from a particular Tibetan, text.
这差强势了，你这肉肉水呢？但强看没动起，他的就是晓得。
Which is a verse at the end of a ritual talking about kind of auspiciousness and prosperity and happiness spreading everywhere. There's a line which says, may everybody be enjoying tea and wine. So the point is that, in the old days, the kind of traditional rural cultures, they don't really have much in the form of entertainment. So when people get together and to celebrate, and so drinking is part of that celebration activity and entertainment.
For monk, tea.
So
for lay people, chang.
So this is why there is this. I mean, it's present in the culture. So it's probably initially the instinct is, the motivation is to really enjoy, to have, to have an
그래서
entertainment.
자박해서 드셔야 유다. 쌈바 말하는 있잖아면 도스. 참 말하는 저 대도금도 쓴다. 근데 이제 드셔야 거다. 좋아, 그렇게 정도 돼.
He's also saying that even among the monks, one could say that there are some who are addicted
그래서
to tea.
드셔도.
Because some monks say that I can stay without champa, but I can't stay without tea, Tibetan tea.
Butter tea.
Yeah, Kent, and then Diana.
Thank you, Russia.
세상한테 네이티브 아메리칸 콘서트 지금 뭐뭐 튕기들이 또 야르신. and education 야르신 또 용도로.
So this would, the point His Holiness is trying to get at is that if the economic conditions of the Native American communities improve, and the education of the younger generation improves, the situation, the problem may change.
That's my feeling, my view.
Kent.
Matthew and His Holiness has helped us see that improving conditions and better education may turn many people away from the paths of craving and protect them and help them find a better life. And you've given us some marvelous tools for thinking about moments of sparks that could start the forest fire but could be stopped in time. I wonder if we could focus on that moment of spark for just a second. And consider a bit of evidence from the neuroscience too. The techniques you describe will work marvelously, it seems, for many sparks that we can all imagine in our lives, sparks that start small before they become the forest fire. And yet it may be that some sparks are harder to control. Some sparks might start very, very, very hot and possibly spark very, very quickly. And we would wonder, what can we do with sparks of that sort? How fast can a spark be intensified? The animal neuroscience evidence would say that when a cue for desire comes, if the brain is stimulated by dopamine or other things, the massively magnified brain response can happen not just in the second that the cue appears, but if we divide that second into 10 pieces, the massive brain response will happen in the first tenth of the first second that the cue appears. And the intensification can be massive. Is the speed of the human mind fast enough to cope with this, or are there limits to what we can do, or are there shortcuts that might protect in advance from such a spark?
Such as what? Can't.
From
Such a
such
spark.
a fast and
Okay.
amplified spark.
Thank you.
So, but I think that's where the prior training probably is most useful, because, of course, it can be so overwhelming, like almost like a shortcut. Often in India, you put your thing and it's already burned before you could pull it out.
I know.
But then I think in that case, the amount of formal training will help. The same way that if you learn to do horse riding or bicycle or whatever, in the beginning, you have to be very, very, very careful. Every small pebble on the road, because you are insecure, and then often a big stone will certainly make you fall. But you see those guys who go rushing down the hills on those mountain bikes, it's extraordinary what they can manage. You think you'll not survive for more than 2 minutes. So I think once you have the experience, you can go on many more rough roads emotionally as well, because somehow you have the sort of gravity not to be unsettled so easily. So I think the more challenging and the more intense and powerful the spark is, the more your experience will be helpful. And that's why also prior training, at least, of course, it may not be enough, but at least this is the way to go, at least. Because otherwise you are, like someone, as I mentioned the other day, who learns sailing on a stormy day. There's no chance. You have to learn sailing in fine day and then gain skills. And then when you are a good sailor, then you can go with rough weather. Otherwise, you just capsize.
Thank you, Mathieu. Sarah.
Just really appreciating the importance of that level of awareness, both before, during, and after, retrospectively in this process. And wondering what the feasibility is of, I'm working with clients myself. I also work with therapists who are working with clients. So I am a non-monastic working with non-monastics who are working with clients. And how possible is it to train that fine-tuned of an awareness to clients, or to train therapists to even train this to clients outside of a monastic setting, where the reality is I may meet with them, at best case scenario, 8 times for 2 hours once a week. How feasible is that?
So, anyway, if I may just say a few words on that, the fact that I presented an outline of the Buddhist practice, I think still most of these things could be embedded in the kind of, part of the techniques of secular ethics, because this is all about mind and emotions. I mean, of course, in our personal life, there's element of devotion to one's teacher and all that, but this is not what I was mentioning about. So those seems quite sophisticated in a way, and then if you go in the teachings, they're even more sophisticated. But basically, I still believe they are part of what is called Buddhist science, which is, if they are true, if they work for everyone. If they are not true, then they don't work for anyone, including monastics or whoever you may say. So I think the studies with short-term training shows that on many occasions, 20 minutes a day for a number of weeks with the right method. So those methods could be, I don't mean to have a light version, but to take what really matters in those methods in an essential way, not in a downgraded way, but in an essential way. And I don't see why dealing with arising of thoughts in different ways and seeing that thoughts are mental construct, they are not something solid. These things Either it's the way mind functions or not. If the way that mind functions, they could be absolutely applied in a secular way, because what does it mean? It's a human affair. It's not a question of Buddhist, even though Buddhists have refined that and explained that and written treatises and that. What I said is that there are some treatises of 300 pages saying this thing in more detail. But still, the core of it, I think, belongs to everyone.
Richie.
I think now perhaps I follow, you see, a little bit propagating Buddhism. I think the basic thing is, you see, Buddhist sort of, or say the Buddhist idea or Buddhist concept. You see, ultimately we ourselves, since we have the Buddha nature, Buddha seed, so we ourselves, you see, become Buddha. So that not seeking blessing from Buddha and pray Buddha, single-pointed sort of faith, bring Buddhahood. No. Buddha himself says, I'm teacher. You must work. So then also the very idea of Buddha is this very mind, completely purified. That is the Buddha, because Buddhahood. So therefore, because of the basis of Buddha is this very mind. And then the way to purify this mind, also mind. The final goal, also Buddha's mind, enlightened.
It's a state of mind.
State of mind. So therefore, shi nizu shedu semgang shekduwa, lamge nizu shedu semgang shekduwa, devu ige ishi chuk shedu semgang shekduwa.
So because of this, in Buddhism, when we speak about the nature of reality, it comes to the mind, nature of mind. And when we speak about the nature of the path, again it comes to the nature of mind. And when we talk about what is the resultant state of enlightenment, again we talk about mind. It comes to mind.
So now, in order to practice that, now, firstly, you should have fuller knowledge about nature of mind. And negative side, positive side. The positive side is the antidote. So that's the practice of Dharma. That's the way to purify. So therefore, some sort of Western Buddhist scholar, they describe Buddhism is not religion, but science of mind. It is quite true. So therefore, for Buddhists, in order to practice, in order to reach Buddhahood, you see, we study about mind, we utilize the positive side of our mind, and in order to reduce the negative, in order to elimination of the negative side. But usually, I mean, generally, even you see the non-Buddhist, some Christian friends, you see, they adopt some sort of Buddhist method in order to promote their compassion or spirit of forgiveness, these things, and also single-pointed sort of because of the tradition,
attention.
These things. So it is okay. It is common. And then, non-believer, of course, real troublemaker is here, not on table, but here. So you see, we have to sort of deal with real troublemaker here. So we need fuller knowledge about mind, about emotion, like that. So here, on the level of secular ethics, which can be universal, the 7 billion human beings, then this knowledge we can share as a sort of science of mind. No matter come from which sources, doesn't matter whether Hindu tradition or Buddhist tradition, no differences like that. And then from sort of scientific research, immense sort of help. So you have the concrete sort of example of thing. Sometimes we 냠용 타는데 concrete 셰도도 남상 어디 자기입니다.
So compared to the scientific presentation, which is really rooted in empiricism as well as facts that you can demonstrate through graphs or whatever it is, in the Buddhist case, of course,
Or
we
Buddhist
can-
or religious
or
experience.
spiritual kind of experience side. Of course, there is a level of empiricism because it is grounded in individual's personal realization and experience. But, we cannot relate it in a kind of a more tangible, factual manner in the way in which science can do.
So certainly, you see, the knowledge which mentioned in Buddhist literature
Source Islam.
is the basis of knowledge of mind or emotion, Raya. Without that, the scientist alone, you see, cannot sort of explain thoroughly about these emotions or minds. So I think I think about now 30 years, you see, as is sort of our dialogue from time to time. Now this is because
27th.
27th.
Yeah.
So immense help, enrich both sides. For me, from childhood, I always have curiosity about the galaxies, all these things. So a meeting with scientists, immense help. One casualty is now I am no longer believe about Mount Meru in the center of the world. That's the only casualty. This doesn't matter whether there's Mount.
It's part of Buddhist cosmology, traditional cosmology.
주로 죽변할 남고치 디셔도와 좀리리리세 셔도와
남부란도 말해 난 아래 바르스만 순거에.
어디 안데 무디부치 데 가버짐 데 가버짐에 그돌려 디 남바스 디션.
So, in fact, although the traditional Buddhist cosmology is Mount Meru-based, kind of Earth-centered, but there was a 6th century Indian master from Nalanda who came up with a kind of a solar-based system.
I think most probably from Nalanda.
From Nalanda, yeah.
Not very sure. But you see, a Buddhist, one scholar, you see, he described sort of round world.
Yeah, it's a round world with the solar, yeah.
So some Hindu scholars,
Astronomers
astronomers, you see,
critique him. Yeah.
did level kudula nangbas lusha.
So when they critique, they say the Buddhists say this. So he was. This is Aryabhata actually, 6th century.
So then, most probably at that time, I think they really has the flourishing Nalanda institution. So he might be Nalanda scholar, like that. So I'm reincarnation of him. So no accept accept flat world, except the round world. So the scientist side knows that many of these are our long-time friend scientists. Now they very much appreciate about explanation about mind, the emotion, and once you see better knowledge, fuller knowledge about that, much easier to tackle these sort of mental problems, like that. Mental problems all
That is kind of emotions.
like that. So mutual benefit, isn't it?
So I want to touch back into your question, Sarah. I think it's really important because you asked basically, can a short intervention with, for example, a teacher or a therapist produce sufficient change that that therapist or teacher can stand in an authentic way in relation to the people that they're helping?
I wanted to just make a comment about that from both a scientific perspective as well as from, I think, a little bit of a Buddhist perspective. Just from a scientific perspective, in terms of how we understand neuroscientifically how the brain changes, the classical Western idea of a person going to a therapist for 45 minutes or an hour a week to produce a meaningful behavioral change is just so inconsistent with what we understand about how the brain changes. And the thought of using that strategy based upon modern neuroscientific knowledge is just, I would say that modern neuroscience and understanding how we learn undermines that kind of strategy. And so I think that I think the honest answer to your question from a scientific perspective is we don't know. But I also believe that there is evidence to suggest that small periods of practice that are repeated very frequently, which is also something that I've heard Buddhist teachers suggest, is something that I think we have a moral imperative to try and to investigate and to determine if we can actually produce some beneficial gain through that kind of practice.
So, Richie, I think, mind training is one thing, that is attention training. But mind training without a moral or ethical substrate is a question that's up for many people in the field today. And I just would like you and others to comment on this because, it's like mindfulness or it's a focused attention intervention, but without the ethical substrate that is inherent to Buddhism.
Well, I think that one can have that ethical stance without it being religious at all. So there are many activities which I think can train attention. So, for example, certain kind of sports or playing a musical instrument can train attention.
Or the military.
Or the military, but we rarely engage in a game of tennis or a game of golf where we invoke the intention, I'm going to play this in order to benefit other beings. That's not the ethical stance we take, although maybe it should be. And that may be a way we can produce more meaningful change. But I think that that is something that...
It seems in the case of addiction that perhaps the first step there ethically might be to turn attention towards the damage that the individual is doing to him or herself and the people around them, and that alone, bringing awareness to that and the training and the attention to those processes and their effects is, by its nature, incredibly ethical and compassionate.
But if counseling also, I was thinking, comes with the recommendation to do simple practices 10, 15 minutes a day, and every week or whatever you counsel, you sort of check, then it's not just counseling, but the counseling should be part of proposing and encouraging very much someone to do practice, yes.
Well, in the simplest way, aspiration or motivation is the kind of base or foundation for the practice of attention, for example, from our perspective. But making more sophisticated ethical principles available in the sense of what His Holiness has talked about in terms of a sort of universal ethic, making that more explicit within the training of therapists or teachers is a question I think that deserves exploration. Arthur?
나 지금 내 얘기를 다 낭초디 패지 리지트 패지 말했음 기. 그봐. 좀 전에랑 기 감도 매버도 뛰니 지금 따와 다 떨어지잖아요. 쉽게 개시 보러 봐. 그럼 타버줘야 그 개시고. 타버줘야 개시고디 개시부 대래 감도 매버도 뛰니 맨자송 되도. 그래서 조조 그게 감도 매버도 뛰니 송야 되다. 그래서 낭초가 가서 좀 전에 내가 남들이 나요 있잖아요. 데리게서 뒤줄이야. 근데 좀 전에 여배 있나? 고물로 여배 있나? 근데 아주 세컬러 에티카 댄데송 그래.
No.
인지미지 낭바 적어서 좀 자이는 송.
No. So talking about the relationship between secular ethics versus Buddhism, His Holiness feels that even if you look at the kind of the development of the Buddha's teachings, there is an emphasis on the practicality of the teachings. There's no emphasis on rigidity. So, for example, if you look at the philosophical views that have been taught by the Buddha, and philosophical view, which is the view about the ultimate nature of reality, is so crucial part of the attainment of of the path. But even there, because taking into account the diversity of the mentality of people, mental dispositions, spiritual inclinations, capacities, and so on, Buddha has taught diverse philosophical views. So, which suggests that it's not so much...
And actually contradict some of his own teaching.
and some of them are contradictory. So what this suggests is not the rigidity to what the message is, but the kind of the appropriateness of the messages to the specific needs.
Skillful means.
So the point His Holiness is making is this. He's saying that given this, if the Buddha were to be alive today or Nagarjuna were to be present today, in addition to teaching Buddhism, they will also talk about secular ethics.
Yeah. Well, and I think also this points to a big question that we have in terms of the development of a curriculum, that is going to be appropriate for, different populations. And obviously, flexibility is really necessary here. Sarah, I wonder if there's any comment, and then Arthur is going to complete
Mark has been waiting for a while.
okay.
So, yeah. Anyway.
Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, just to put a slightly different spin on it, but I think it goes to the same place. A lot of people come into addiction through the gate of suffering. I mean, most of them, 90%. And Sarah mentioned one kind of suffering, which is being depleted of resources because of family and economic problems. But when I talk to the people in my blog community who have been addicts and who are now recovered, most of them would say that if you ask them, would you have it any other way? Do you wish that you could have avoided all this? They say, no, I'm glad that I went through this. I feel like a richer, fuller, more developed human being. Why? Because when you get into addiction, first of all, you experience relief, and then you experience suffering, relief, suffering, back and forth. So you then open up that dimension. And you also experience different kinds of motivation, like you're talking about, Matthew. You need a motivation to stop, but then you have the motivation to go. Motivation is also switching back and forth. Through these things, you're expanding dimensions of awareness about these fundamental things, about motivation, about relief, suffering, and self and other. That's another dimension. You think of how much you need it for yourself, but then you think of the harm you're doing to yourself and others. Again, you're expanding a dimension of awareness. So through the process of addiction, you require, it requires the kind of awareness, Your Holiness, that you have been emphasizing. It requires the expansion of awareness in order to get past it. And that's why these people are feeling more enriched as a result.
Thank you, Mark. Very interesting perspective.
Is there any idea of how many among those seriously addicted just don't make it through in percentage? I mean, some of them can't manage either alone or with help to get out of it.
Most make it through. Most recover. Viveka gave us some statistics yesterday that something like 85% of alcoholics recover by themselves and self-change. So really, most addicts do recover. There's like 10% or so that are what we sometimes call terminal. But most people come through it, and they may be much more aware human beings after the fact.
Nora, and then Arthur.
It depends also on the drug, and there are many addicts that don't recover. For example, in heroin addiction, 50% of people that are addicted to heroin will be there 30 years later. Those are the statistics that we have in the United States. So there's a very high rate of suicide, too, among severely addicted individuals. And those numbers don't necessarily transpire. There's a significant number of premature deaths from addiction, too, and those don't transpire. So there are those that are able and successfully stop taking drugs, but there are many that are lost in the process. If I may ask a very short question to His Holiness. As you hear us speak, the scientists and the clinicians on drug addiction, what's the perspective of Buddhism vis-a-vis addiction? Is it a disease of the mind, or is it a disease of the brain?
Thanks, Nora.
Addiction
I think there's some pain here. This is
So the physical pain, for example, you have in the arm, it's a physical pain, not a mental pain.
So that the 대주체의 니면로 섬기 토마다 섬기터네 용대비체 더 섬된 저샤이대비체 이내 코달 류 직단 레저든지 지금 슈김지 최차례 제일 양고 류랑 토네로 되지.
So His Holiness was saying that he would see actually two dimensions to this. Initially, some of them may arise more as a kind of a mental suffering, a form of a mental pain or mental illness.
다 이내 비디 개발면도 변화 지금 섬머지부시는 변화 창라 동네지 말이다. 양고 섬기티야 좋아. 다 섬머지부 개면미세. 배 김나로 지기는 저거 장수 동네지 인디다 차지 진이 쇼데 인디 장 콤다데 다 배제 수구야 콤대베 소리지 맨도 섬기티.
So, for example, you can see two scenarios of someone being addicted to alcohol. One would be, because of some problem in their life, some depression or suffering or sadness, then they take to alcohol and in the process gets addicted. So then the initial impulse is really coming from the mental suffering. But then you can have another situation where, someone in social context start drinking with friends and then, one thing leads to another thing, finally gets hooked on and become addicted. So there, the initial impulse is not really driven by suffering. So the point is that when you get habituated, when you get really addicted, then there is probably a physical dimension. And even the brain, part of the brain gets changed. So then it's, there's both mental and physical dimension.
That was a wonderful middle path analysis. Thank you so much.
So His Holiness is saying that whether it's a middle path or he's just copping out.
So talk about copping out. Can we entertain your question this afternoon, Arthur? We need to break for lunch. Thank you, Your Holiness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mathieu.